Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. I'm delighted this evening to welcome Natalie Strecker to join us on the programme. She's a human rights activist, a Palestine solidarity campaigner, a YouTuber, writer, and a member of the Resist movement, I'm pleased to say. And she's going to be speaking to us tonight about the resistance to the Israeli apartheid system. And she's got quite a lot of experience in that regard, has been in Palestine as a human rights monitor in Hebron. But first of all, I want to ask Natalie if she could tell us a little bit about a project that she's working on now to raise funds for an interesting theatre production initiative to really put the Israeli military court system on trial. And it's, I think, as I understand it, Natalie, centered around Issa Amro, who is a Palestinian activist who was subjected to trumped-up charges from the Israeli state. And people may remember, some of our regular viewers, that Issa was actually on our program a few months ago speaking about the situation in Palestine. So just tell us a little bit about that, Natalie, about that project, how far you've got and what's hoped to be achieved by that and how much you're seeking to raise.
Yeah, of course. So basically what happened is I was contacted by an Israeli friend of mine called Jose, who I met while serving as a human rights monitor in Hebron. So he is an activist with Tayush, which is kind of like an Israeli organization that has a partnership with Palestinians trying to resist the occupation non-violently. And he contacted me and explained to me there was this project going on and would I be happy to be connected with Einat Weizman, who is an Israeli actress, playwright and activist. So I said, yeah, of course, absolutely. And then following a conversation with her, I was then put in contact with Tomo Fowler, who is one of the directors, a theatre director who will also be working on the project along with a Norwegian theatre director called Marius, I think it was. So basically I'm kind of tasked with being the fundraiser for the project. There's a GoFundMe, which a lot of you might well have seen already. As a minimum, we need to fundraise £2,000 just for the basic costs of that. Although they had like a seed fund commission they received from, I think it's called Finborough, I just need to check that, which is a theatre in the UK. I think it's based in London, actually. So yeah, Finborough Theatre. So basically, obviously because of COVID, they've really been impacted along with many other sort of different areas and industries by COVID, which is why we're sort of doing the fundraising. But as you said, the theatre production is to basically put the Israeli military court on trial. It will be a series of projects, of plays. The first one will be focused on my good friend Issa Amro, as you know, is a UN formally recognised human rights defender who was basically convicted. He was originally had 18 charges laid against him, all trumped up, but was convicted on 6 earlier this year. I kind of wrote about that. People who are interested can obviously look at my Medium account and read that. But the idea is to then focus on child prisoners and female prisoners within the military court system, which, as we know, has a conviction rate over 99%. So that is just a form of creative resistance. And I think in light of what's just happened with the release of the Human Rights Watch report on apartheid and how Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid, I think it couldn't come really at a better time, because we know that one of the ways that Israel puts that apartheid on people is through the military court system.
Yeah, interesting. How can people contribute, Natalie, to the fund if they want to?
So if they go to obviously I'm on Twitter at Natalie Strecker. I can't remember the numbers that come underneath it, but you'll find me easily enough. There is a GoFundMe. It's also featured on Jersey Palestine Solidarity campaign page. So they can just look on there, or otherwise they can contact you and I can direct them to the GoFundMe account.
Nice one, yeah. I mean, you're a kind of veteran pro-Palestinian campaigner. How would you, in your assessment, say the attitudes of the British public has changed or not over the time that you've been involved? Is there greater awareness now of what's happening in Israel?
Absolutely. I think that the tide really turned. I mean, it has different things obviously attracted different individuals to the movement and at least to become aware of the situation. I think 2014 was a huge one with Protective Edge in Gaza. And I think that over my short period, what I have noticed, although there's two things that are happening. One, there is greater awareness, and I think more and more people are seeing Israel for the apartheid state that it is. And obviously that's backed up by the reports by Israeli group B'Tselem and Yesh Din. Obviously Amnesty's been talking about things for a little while about the apartheid nature of Israel. But definitely that has helped promote it. But I also think the silencing of Palestinians has caused, so that although more people are aware, and I think more people are supportive, we also see people silencing themselves and self-censoring as a result of I'm sure we'll speak about at some point, the witch hunt that happened in the Labour Party, and this real fear that individuals have. I mean, I don't know if any of you watched the Channel 4 reports the other night. I know you saw clips. I tend to stay away from the most part from mainstream media. For obvious reasons, but it talked. Jon Snow was speaking to a guy who was involved in the Mars, a Palestinian guy who was involved in the Mars project, and he actually didn't speak about Palestine at all. He talked about Gaza, a region in the Middle East, which was really interesting. And Jon Snow historically has not been too bad for a mainstream journalist. So that was really disappointing. But you see a lot of this self-censorship. So although I would say there is growing support, there is also this growing self-censorship as a reaction to the fear of being accused of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. I mean, we will come on to that a little bit later on in the programme. But that's certainly been my experience as well, what you've said there in relation to there being a great awareness. I mean, myself included. I mean, I always had an interest, but wasn't fully au fait with the situation in Palestine. And certainly it was an eye-opener once I started to look into it a bit more. But what do you put it down to, the fact that there does seem to be this great awareness now? Because I think going back, from certainly when I was a youngster in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't really an issue that people knew very much about. But I think the awareness is a lot higher now. What do you put that down to?
I think it's social media. Obviously, social media we always have to be careful with, because we know that our timelines can be hacked, as we know from Cambridge Analytica and other things. But I think that social media can also be used in a very positive way to highlight situations and allows ordinary people to have a platform. So I do think that a lot of it comes from that. And also, as more people are aware, they tend to talk. I mean, that's what's happened with me, from speaking to different people and them. Quite often when people hear about Palestine initially, they think, oh, it's controversial, it's complicated, all these things. But if you're somebody who if you're a friend that they know, and then you start talking about it, or they know that you've been there, they feel much more comfortable to ask the questions. So I think that we should never underestimate the value of actually just speaking to people, being appropriate, being tactical, being smart about how we kind of discuss the subject. Not to bombard them, because that can turn people off. But that's been my experience. So I do think the combination of social media, more people having awareness and therefore talking about it, I think that has been huge. And obviously this huge left-wing movement, obviously even with Corbyn having been a supporter of Palestine, although there's been a lot of damage as a result of that in terms of the Board of Deputies and everything that they've done, and obviously the Israel lobby groups. But in addition to that, I think it has also made people look at it to go, well, what is the fuss all about? So in some ways, they probably helped raise the issue or put the focus, the spotlight on the issue, even though that probably wasn't what they hoped.
No, indeed. I just want to show a couple of videos now, just on your point, Natalie, about social media. They're very short videos, and I think it does illustrate the point that you're making about getting the message out there. Of course, what we're finding, though, is that the algorithms are being manipulated. And so although we've got access to social media, I think, the things aren't getting as wide a circulation. Left-wing voices aren't getting as wide a circulation as they used to do. But take my own, when I was first re-elected to Parliament in 2017, And I've got a really great team of people around me who are really very kind of astute with the use of social media and filming and technical stuff, which I'm not very good at. I used to just sort of go in front of the camera and put stuff out there. But we used to get on a regular basis, we'd be disappointed if we didn't get over 100,000 views. Most of them would get 500,000 views, and some of them got over several million views. The one I did on Grenfell, for example, I think got 4 or 5 million views. The algorithms were then changed, and we were lucky to get 50, if we got 50 or 60,000, we thought we were doing really, really well. They're a lot less than that. So that's something to be mindful of as well. But it is a great tool, though, and I think we do need to use it. And the more people that do use it, of course, it's a way of amplifying that word of mouth, isn't it? Really, that we used to perhaps try to do in the past when we were much more restricted with media. But I'll just ask Gaz now to just play these couple of clips, and then I'm going to ask you about your time as a human rights monitor in Hebron. What those two videos illustrate to me, I think, is the daily reality of Zionism. The brutality of it in terms of the way in which Palestinian people are treated on a daily basis. We know about children being dragged away, and the way protesters are dealt with by the Israeli Defense Force. People regularly being, beaten, killed, maimed, imprisoned. Shocking state of affairs, and of course the whole settler colonial aspect of Zionism that is essentially just pushing people out of their land, stealing their homes. I mean, of course, the original establishment of Israel required, did it not, the forcible removal of 750,000 Palestinian people. So it is a settler colonial state. The nation law legislation that came in basically emphasized the second-class status of non-Jewish Israelis. And so I just wanted to, and the point I was just going to make, Natalie, there is, as I've said, that those two videos were shown on. I mean, I saw them on Twitch, and I thought they'd be relevant to our discussion this evening. So it's a good way, I think, of just sort of getting that message out there. And nothing speaks better, I think, than moving pictures in that sense. So just tell us a little bit about your experience then as a human rights monitor in Hebron. I think you were there a couple of 3 years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there in the autumn of 2018. I served as a human rights monitor in Hebron or Al Khalil. And actually, whilst I was there, it was really interesting to see the difference between different units as well, because in the first part of my, and there's an important point related to this, is in the beginning we had the Nahul, who come from a kibbutz, and I think that many of the Israeli soldiers in there, because a lot of them, obviously, they're just school leavers, they're only young, it's the years before they go on to university generally. And some of them you could see felt very uncomfortable about what it was they were doing and try to be as humane as possible within a context that violates human rights on a daily basis. That's not obviously true of all of them, but certainly there were some that we observed that with. But halfway through the period that we were stationed there, we saw the Golani Brigade. Now, the Golani Brigade were one of the Zionist militia. That's how they were formed. And the Golani Brigade were previously, they're extremists. And previously, when they served within Hebron, their service was cut short abruptly because of the amount of human rights violations that happened during their period of serving within that area. So during my period there was a real change in terms of real escalation of the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. But in terms of how it was generally, I think I would say, I mean, I've said this before, I did a podcast with a friend of mine called Eddie, which some people may have seen sort of a clip of. And so just to repeat some of what I said there, you really see the best and the worst of humanity. I met incredible Israelis, brave, obviously Palestinians, incredible, that endure things that no human should need to endure. But it was, I think people have spoken about the banality of evil. I think I've heard that expression used before. And I think that's really what you observe. So there's the extreme things I saw, like a settler tried, whilst I was giving with my team protective presence, when the settlers were going to their Shabbat service. But during that period, I saw a settler deliberately try to run over a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. I managed to grab one of the children whilst the father grabs the other. And then there was the time where I just visited. I'd literally been there a short time before. They shot an unarmed Palestinian father as he was leaving his home and left him to bleed out on the floor. So there's that extreme violence we saw, and there were kind of sort of other incidents. But alongside that, you see the total humiliation of Palestinians in every conceivable way. So whether it's at the checkpoints, making them stand, making them lift up their tops, like old men were having to undo their trousers, and it would be young women doing this, Israeli soldiers enforcing this. I saw children that were held, locked into the checkpoint and not allowed to leave, even with us sort of asking questions about what was happening. In fact, on one occasion, when it was, I think it was during the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, so they obviously have settlers, but lots of other settlers from around Israel will come to Hebron to do tours and the rest of it. But although freedom of movement is greatly restricted anyway, it's restricted even more during these periods. And so there was one occasion when they were just trying to access school where the children were stopped. And after about 10 minutes, I went and asked the what seemed to be the most senior Israeli soldier what was happening, and he said he noticed it. So he went and spoke to them, and then came back and said, "Well, what it is," he says, "we're just waiting." And there are about 6 soldiers there with guns. What it is we're waiting for the other Israeli soldiers to arrive before we can let them out in order to protect the Jewish citizens of the area. And these were children that can't have been any older than 8. But there were so many things, like obviously we saw homes being trashed. I was there for the feast of Sarah, which is a made-up feast, by the way. It's only been happening the last few years. Where Israeli settlers and actually international Zionists from all around the world, Jewish Zionists, would descend on the area, and they were camping everywhere. And Hebron is, I think it's the only city in the West Bank where alcohol is forbidden. And they were drinking alcohol and chucking their beer bottles at Palestinian homes. They were attacking Palestinians. One of the times when we were giving presents within the souk, they were overturning the tables of Palestinians that had all their wares on that they were trying to sell. I kind of talk about that, and I've got a Medium article where I talk about my reflections on serving in Palestine. I wrote it for the 75th anniversary of our liberation in Jersey from our own occupation. Obviously, it was a walk in the park compared to what the Palestinians have to endure. But there's a little bit of video footage on there you can see during that period. But there's so many things, like You know, many of the Palestinian children, well, the families rely on food from the World Food Programme, but also they go to this, it's a charity where Palestinians donate and others donate foods, and then you can go and collect food. So you see people, Palestinian children, coming with buckets to come and get their soup and to get some bread. And for no discernible reason, the soldiers would just make them wait at the checkpoint, as if just to remind them that they were inferior. And they'd be standing there with their buckets of soup, just not being allowed to go through.
Terrible, terrible.
No, it's just horrendous. Yeah,
shocking, and to have actually witnessed it and to get that first-hand account is very, very powerful, Natalie, I've got to say. You mentioned the kibbutz, and of course, many of us in the Labour Party, and me included, years ago, used to look on kibbutz as being the socialist paradise. But of course, it's anything but that. It's kind of apartheid in action again, isn't it? I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, what your thoughts are about the kibbutz system. And
well, the kibbutz is sorry, go on.
No,
Yeah.
You carry on.
Yeah, so obviously the kibbutz system, because this is the thing people forget when they look at Israel, and they often think, well, the issue is Netanyahu. But I think people need to wake up to the reality that the issue is not Netanyahu. The issue, as you rightly said earlier, is settler colonialism. It was left groups that set up Israel. It was leftist groups, or so-called leftist groups, that were responsible for the massacres, that set up the militia. And you're quite right, set up the kibbutz. That's not, obviously, I met a few people from the kibbutz. I think there's the Israelis Against Home Demolitions, which were incredible. I can't remember the name of the gentleman I met now, but I certainly remember a lady called Ruth Hiller, who gave an incredible talk about the militarization of Israeli society, which was so important and so eye-opening in terms of the damage that this is doing to Israeli society, because obviously it's destroying the moral fabric of their society. But in terms of the kibbutz now, I mean, what I would say is a lot of them are private now, and I remember that being highlighted as an issue to us. But yeah, the kibbutz, obviously they're Jewish only. People can go and volunteer on them. Quite often there's restrictions. It depends how liberal that they are, and you will get, obviously, as anywhere in Israeli society, those who support the Palestinians and recognize the apartheid nature of Israel. But kibbutz in general is not a progressive. It's not what it's sold to be. And I think it's really important that people understand that. And often this is the issue that you get also with liberal Zionism, the idea that the occupation isn't nice and at some point should be ended, but no recognition of the Nakba, of how Israel was formed, and the broken bodies really of Palestinians that it was built on.
When I was a student, was a mature student, went to a polytechnic in the 1980s to train as a social worker, and in our social policy sessions, the kibbutz there, was held up as a great model of how an ideal kind of cooperative society would work. We didn't hear anything about this. I mean, and certainly nothing on the news, and as I say, just kind of reinforce that essentially propaganda. But there's a lot of people, Natalie, and I'm sure you've heard it said to you, who say, and it's often Israel apologists who say, well, why are you focusing on Palestine? There are many other human rights abuses around the world. What's so special about Palestine? And they try and imply that because we're focusing on Palestine, that implies some underlying or even overt anti-Semitism. Yeah. What do you say to that when people say, well, why don't you focus on other human rights abuses around the world?
Well, clearly it's whataboutery. I mean, what I would say is it's for each individual to decide which area they want to focus on. Nobody says that if people decide to focus on Tibet or, other areas of, the crimes of Saudi Arabia against the Yemeni people, I think that, it's just a way of claiming victimhood again, and we see this constantly, this claim of victimhood, which is so destructive and actually endangers Jewish lives, as we well know when we witness kind of what's happening in the world. And I think that in terms, I mean, if I talk about my own personal reason for focusing on Palestine, that may be helpful, because I think it's probably similar to many other people. There's a lot I didn't know about Palestine. I didn't know about Palestine for years, to be honest. I knew it was an issue, but I thought it was a religious issue and kind of just thought it was too much of a mess to look at. And it was only when I started working with a colleague who actually was married to a Palestinian and heard these conversations with her husband about her mother-in-law being stuck at a checkpoint, that my ears kind of pricked, and I thought, what's all that about? And that was my route into Palestinian solidarity. And originally I had planned to join Amnesty Jersey, to deal, because I'm interested in all human rights, as most Palestinian solidarity activists are, and most of us actually on the left as a whole are. But the reason why I ended up focusing on Palestine was because Amnesty Jersey refused to do anything on the issue and said there was two sides to every story, and were clearly anti-Palestinian. And when obviously there's this idea that Israel is this liberal democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, I think that for me, it's should come under greater scrutiny because of the values it claims it upholds when clearly it doesn't. And I think because the Palestinians have been so silenced, I mean, they're the most silenced people, most silenced, oppressed people in the world. That's beyond question. You don't have this issue with any other group. And for me, that's why I took it up. And I think that maybe that's why lots of other people, so when people say, why do you focus on that? Often it's for those reasons. The claim of liberal democracy is an apartheid, and just I think the recognition of how unjust the system is and how people are being censored so greatly.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to veterans of the ANC struggle, people like Ronnie Casrells, who's himself Jewish, and they say that the apartheid system in Palestine is worse. The apartheid inflicted by the Israelis is worse than what they endured. And of course, Nelson Mandela, of course, on record, isn't he, is saying that the freedom will be incomplete until we get the liberation of the Palestinian people. But I think there's also a special responsibility for me personally in relation to Palestine. I don't you think about this, Natalie, because it's Britain that actually created it. Yeah. I mean, going back, the kind of Balfour Declaration before that, and then and that's, I don't know whether felt an obligation following the appalling events of the Second World War, the Holocaust, etc. But given that it was Britain that created this terrible situation, I mean, I do think there is a special responsibility. I just want to get your thoughts on the two-state solution, which is often advocated by the likes of so-called Labour Friends of Israel and the so-called Jewish Labour Movement, both of which are Zionist organizations.
Yeah.
For me, I don't believe in a two-state solution. I think it's a dead duck. I think it's impossible. They completely atomized the West Bank now, and I think the only credible way forward ultimately would be a one-state solution with equal rights for everybody. But what's your take? I mean, you've been there. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that, what I would like to say first of all is probably as a European, and especially as a British European, I feel that it's the Palestinians to make that decision. I wouldn't like to be. We've imposed enough upon them as a nation. I don't want to impose anything else on them. However, my personal view is I would agree with you. I think a two-state solution is dead. It's a nonsense. It's just a way of giving Israel extra time to do what it's doing. I mean, how do you dismantle you? If you ever been to Palestine, and I really would encourage people to go and visit Palestine, you'll be fine. If you want any advice around who you go with, but there's brilliant groups like Green Olive Tours that you can go with. They're not going to target you as a European. It's still not in their interest to do that, and go and see it for yourself. But when you look at the size of the settlements, there is no way you're going to dismantle that. And I also think that, so I do believe personally in a one-state solution that because I think it's in the long term in both parties' interests, because if you have a shared future, you both want it to work. And I think that we know that Israel will not accept a two-state solution where the Palestinians have, I don't know how you'd manage it anyway, if you think of how, like you said, it's atomized, I think was the expression you used. But when you have Gaza, which is, in one place, one territory, I don't even know why they thought that would work. But when you have that situation, but additionally, because we know that Israel would never allow Palestine to be militarized, and we know that the moment that that they would create events to find a reason to go back into Palestine. Whereas if you have a one-state solution, which is a secular state for all people, one vote, I think that's the only just way of moving forward. You can't undo the crimes of the past, but if there's the chance of any reconciliation and moving forward in a moral way, I think that the one-state solution is the only answer to the situation now.
I mean, look, I tell you what, many Jewish comrades have said to me that they are very concerned, actually, about the belligerent attitude that has been adopted by the Zionist lobby inside the Labour Party and indeed outside the Labour Party. And we're seeing now academics being targeted. A friend of mine, Professor David Miller, being targeted right now. And there are others as well, of course. And people like Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi from the Jewish Voice for Labour, as I think the term that she used, this was a couple of 3 years ago, actually, before I was suspended from the Labour Party. I think her precise words were that this will encourage Jew hate, or basically anti-Semitism, you know, and it's totally counterproductive. But I mean, of course, other people like Tony Greenstein, son of a rabbi, I mean, he's very clear and, you know, a student of these issues, you know, has pointed out that, you know, as far as the Zionists is concerned, they don't really care about that. If in some ways, I think Tony, I'm paraphrasing what Tony's saying, I'm not putting words into his mouth. But I get the sense of what he was saying is that that actually serves their purpose, really. And, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, I think they sort of see, you know, consolidates the kind of role of Israel, and, you know, the sense that, oh, well, you know, you're not safe anyway, you need to be, you know, kind of come to Israel in that sense. So I think that's the sort of position that Tony takes. I think there's a lot of truth in that from what I've seen, but obviously Tony's a lot more expert on it than me. But I just wanted to move on actually, because we are well, we've gone half an hour already. Very, very interesting. But I just wanted to get your take on the just the way in which this whole has played out within the Labour Party and the influence that it's having on our democracy. And I know that you were a member of the Labour Party, and you referred yourself to the Governance and Legal Unit, the Compliance Unit, on the basis that you know, you were not going to be quiet about solidarity with Palestine, but that according to the IHRA examples of anti-Semitism, that, you know, you would fall foul of that. And tell us a little bit about that, because you wrote a very powerful letter to the General Secretary. I think you quoted Martin Luther King at the end, his famous quote where he said, "It's not the words of your enemies that you remember; it's the silence of your friends." And I certainly know that myself. To be honest with you, well, from not from grassroots activists, I've got to say, but from the Socialist Campaign Group inside the Labour Party, who were absolutely silent when it was disgraceful, I was targeted. But I'm not the only one. I mean, many other people like Ken Livingston, Tony Greenstein, who I've already mentioned, sort of a rabbi, you know, people like Cyril Chilton, who I also often quote, who's the son of two Holocaust survivors, two survivors of Auschwitz, was actually expelled, accused of anti-Semitism and expelled. This is grotesque. It's appalling. But just tell me, I mean, that was a really powerful letter. And what reaction did you get? And what's the upshot from that?
So obviously, I think you probably know that I've left Labour now after Labour leaks and everything else. It was just too much for me, although I was never suspended for my letter. So I just highlight that. I did think I would be, but I wasn't, and nor was Haim Bresheeth, who obviously followed my example with that. But the reason why I wrote the letter was just because I was so furious about what was happening, and I wanted to expose the witch hunt, or have a go at trying to expose the witch hunt for what it was. And the final straw for me was when Joe Bird, as you know, a fantastic Jewish councillor, and also was one of the most popular at the time candidates for the NEC, was suspended for anti-Semitism for what in effect was a joke, which was just absolutely ludicrous. I mean, it is absolutely disgraceful. I mean, now we know, obviously, under Starmer, we've had a disproportionate targeting of left-wing Jews, which is unforgivable when it's, you know, under the claim of trying to rid the Labour Party of anti-Semitism. So that's why I wrote the letter. In terms of the response, as I've just mentioned, Haim Bresheeth, who's an Israeli academic, wrote his own letter, which was fantastic. There was a lot of positive support from grassroots members. I had lots of people sort of writing to me. There were some that weren't so happy, including a couple of groups I won't mention because it's probably not sensible to do that, but one basically inferred that I was anti-Semitic because there was a call, somebody, and actually a Jewish individual, an associate who I've not actually met in person, but they were very kind and sent it out to a number of people within a group that I'm involved with, or had been involved with, suggesting that they follow suit. As a result of that, one of the individuals leading that group or responsible for that group inferred I was anti-Semitic and told them not to do it. And another organization that I'm a member of had basically spoke to me and said that they didn't think it was very helpful at all. But in terms of grassroots, they're overwhelming support for it. I think it reached a lot of people. I think that the argument I made was a strong argument. And I think that it helped others to be able to formulate their own arguments when being accused of anti-Semitism. So I think in that respect, there was a lot of support. And I know that I gave, obviously, I said to anyone who wanted to that they could copy and amend the letter as they wish to, and then submit their own accusation against themselves, which I know a number of did because they wrote to me and told me that. But beyond that, I don't know. You don't know who reads these letters. I did get one response from John McDonnell that was, I think it was a long time afterwards, actually. He wrote to me and asked me what the outcome of it was. And I kind of mentioned that I hadn't been suspended, but I had since left the Labour Party. But that was quite late in the day. But beyond that, there was nothing. I didn't receive anything from the Labour Party at all.
That's interesting. I mean, and another organisation I'm involved with, the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which we established after I won my case against the Labour Party and got costs awarded, and we put that into a new organisation to help others who have been similarly targeted. We've been helping a number of people who've been suspended for years. I mean, a Palestinian guy, actually, is one of the people that we're representing. He grew up in Gaza. Was wounded, shot in the leg by an Israeli sniper. He's lost relatives in the 2008 bombardment. He left Gaza. He found his way to Britain, went to college, and set up an online platform to, I think he called it the Palestine Telegraph or something. It was a kind of an open source online platform to talk about Palestine solidarity and his experiences, and giving opportunities for people to put their stories on there. And the parties that use that as a pretext to suspend him. I mean, it's shocking, frankly, and he's been left suspended for, so I think he was suspended in something like 2017 now, something like 2016, 2017. I mean, it's truly appalling. I mean, the way people have been treated is absolutely shocking by the Labour Party. And of course, when they get the letter of suspension, I mean, you're given this very helpful advice that if you are feeling stressed by this, and it does affect people's mental ill health, of course, it does. I was very kind of low myself when I was targeted. But it refers you to the Samaritans. I mean, it's just shocking.
It's just great. And there was a lady that died. I can't remember her name.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, indeed, indeed. So it really has a really traumatic impact on people, and because the Labour Party had been a big part of people's, a big part of my life, and for that to happen is incredibly traumatic. But organisations like the Board of Deputies, it's a very partisan organisation. I think your thoughts are on that. I'd be interested. I think you've said they're kind of effectively undermining British democracy. Just tell us a little bit about what your thoughts about the Board of Deputies.
Well, the Board of Deputies, as we know at best, I mean, having spoken to some Jewish friends and associates, represent maybe between 20 and 30% of Jews. So first of all, we need to establish that fact that they don't speak on behalf of the majority of Jews. And they're Tory voters. So that's a bit of an issue who've actually supported and congratulated far-right individuals, around the world. So I think that's important to remember. But yeah, they're an absolute, I mean, they are a lobby group for Israel. It's not anti-Semitic to state that, because it's a fact. You can just look at the things that they've posted if anyone's a little bit unsure about that. But they've obviously worked to undermine our democracy. I mean, I can talk, if I speak, obviously most of you will know what's happened in the UK, but if I look at what's happened in Jersey, where I live. So in 2018, Jersey was finally looking at hate speech legislation, which couldn't come soon enough. I mean, we're a little bit late on that, as Jersey is in so many things. And that's important. And the IHRA, of course, got mentioned at that time. And we actually submitted a consultation into the consultation. A few of us put together a letter and submitted it. And the government of Jersey, to be fair, at that point said that they weren't going to adopt it because the legislation that they were drafting, they felt sufficiently covered anti-Semitism as all other forms of racism and bigotry. But obviously there was the Board of Deputies weren't going to accept this. First of all, there was the president of our local synagogue, Stephen Regal, who's attacked me several times in our local paper for being an anti-Semite, of course. Despite me actually having written to the synagogue when I first set up the Jersey Palestine Solidarity Campaign and asking if they at any point had any concerns to let me know, I'd be very happy to meet for coffee with them, just to highlight to them what it was we were trying to achieve. It had nothing to do with the local Jewish community, but the issue of the crimes that Israel was committing, which of course they didn't respond to. But they obviously contacted the Board of Deputies who intervened in our democracy. There was an article in 2018 in the Times of Israel, in the Jewish Chronicle. They talked about it being disturbing that our government was going to not adopt with all its examples, the IHRA. And then that was kind of happening just before I went to Palestine. Then when I came back, and in 2019, without any kind of debate in our local parliament, the IHRA, with all its examples, was adopted. And not only that, but our communications director now for our public sector is a former Israeli soldier that used to work in the Conservative office. So, I mean, a Board of Deputies who should have no jurisdiction over Jersey, because Jersey has responsibility for its own domestic affairs. Obviously, we don't for other things, but for our local policy, so they shouldn't have any jurisdiction over here, and yet they were able to intervene in our democracy. But we know that that's happened in the UK. I mean, not just the Board of Deputies. I would say it's a Board of Deputies who have clearly got an alliance with other lobby groups and other interest groups, not just because of interest in Israel, but in terms of continuing the status quo and neoliberalism, which is destroying our communities and our planet. So, I mean, it's terrifying, and people should be aware. And what I would say is, as well, Chris, that is very scary, and this is a point I've made before, is it's playing into anti-Semitic tropes. If you think about, some of those tropes about, Jews controlling, and having this undue influence, well, the Board of Deputies doing what it does plays into those tropes, along with this constant conflation of Judaism and Zionism. And this is why it's so dangerous. I have Jewish friends who are terrified about what the Board of Deputies are doing, what it means for them. Because I think that it is increasing anti-Semitism. Because when people are being told constantly that Israel and Jews are one and the same thing, Zionism and Judaism, Zionism, as we know, is a political ideology, but is the same thing as Judaism, people who are ignorant and who haven't got the time to go and do the research and all the rest of it are going to start believing that. And then there will be this growing Jewish and anti-Jewish sentiments, which is dangerous. Indeed.
I mean, and it works both ways as well. And I think, there is a real fear in the, people aren't necessarily politically active in the Jewish community who genuinely did believe that a Corbyn-led Labour government would, be introducing pogroms and concentration camps. I mean, it's really irresponsible, frankly, what they've been doing, and really unforgivable. But I want to move on because we want to get a reaction from our audience, and I just want to ask you one final point, because I know you're active. You're a model activist, I've got to say, Natalie, but you're involved in the campaign against the arms trade, and I just want to show a quick video of a protest that you were involved with. Again, the Israeli state very instrumentally, in the whole kind of arms trade, both in terms of Britain selling arms to Israel, and of course during the apartheid era in South Africa, they selling arms to the apartheid regime there. But let me just play this quick video and then get your reaction.
Okay.
I'm not getting any sound on this.
No. I'm trying to bring it up so I can see what's happening.
I don't know what's happened there. It's gone off. Gaz is playing it. Have we not got the sound, Gaz? It disappeared. He has.
I'll sort it out now and put it back in a second.
Okay, then, yeah. I mean, that is an issue, though, isn't it? Natalie, in relation to the the arms trade and Israel. Just walk us through a little bit about what you were doing there and what the concerns were.
Yeah, of course. So, well, in fact, there will be another convention this year. So, as many of you will know, the UK and other continue to sell arms to Israel, although they know full well, and Saudi Arabia, as they commit crimes in Yemen, even though the courts told them they weren't supposed to be doing that. But yeah, they sell these weapons which are being used against a civilian population, and also being tested. Often you'll find that the weapons at these conventions will be labelled as battle tested, and what they mean is they're battle tested on Palestinians, and that is what's terrifying.
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, I'm an animal rights campaigner, and got concerns about vivisection and experimenting and testing weapons on animals. I mean, they're doing it on people. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, it's kind of beyond anything really. But I think Gaza, we got it is video ready to roll now again. Let's see if
people power. We're mobilising to try and stop the arms fair, try and stop these trucks getting in the first place. Israel will have its own designated pavilion in the arms fair to market its weapons, which are tested on Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
Battle tested on the broken bodies of ordinary people, of children, of civilians, of journalists and of medics. It is a horrific situation that our government is profiting from an arms trade that is allowing regimes all around the world to commit brutal human rights violations.
Strange having this in my home borough in Newham. These weapons are being sold to states like Israel, who use them illegally against the plighted people of Palestine. So it's vital to come and stop the war here, where it starts, so that it can't get any further.
War starts here. It's here in the UK, and we really, really need to show our opposition as people who are living here in this country.
The aim is to try and stop the arms fair from coming, and we can only do that with people like you. Come out here and join the people power and join the protest against the arms fair.
It's vital that other people come down because you can see the police turnout is huge. The police don't want us protesting mass murderers and illegal weapon sales. So we need as many people here as we can get.
It's absolutely important that all people of conscience come together, stand together, and that we will stand with one voice and say, stop arming Israel.
I think you were dragged off by the cops, weren't you, at one of those protests?
Yeah, I was. It makes me sound much more badass than I am, Chris. But yeah, no, I was. So one of the things, obviously, I helped with organise the Palestine Solidarity Campaign response to the arms fair. And one of the suggestions I had for a creative action was to dress as paramedics and to kneel in front of a truck, which I did. And I don't know if you saw the footage, but I kind of had blood spattered on me, and I was holding up a picture of Razan al-Najjar, who was a medic who was shot dead by a sniper as she tried to deliver emergency aid to a Palestinian. And basically the police picked me up and carried me off, which actually made the news in Jersey. And I was spoken to by one of my managers who were just but it was fine because one of the senior managers was supportive of my actions, which was good. So yeah.
No, well, well done for that, and I think it's quite inspiring to see those sorts of demonstrations, and it's really important that people do get involved in that. Obviously,
absolutely.
Once the lockdown ends and we can start, getting back to some semblance of normality, we need to resist, and the way to resist is on the street, the sort of thing that you were doing, and there's the great tradition of that, isn't there, around the world, from the civil rights movement in the United States to the movement in India, South Africa. We actually have to put ourselves in necessarily in harm's way, but certainly in the way, as it were, to make our feelings known. Let me just go to Lizzie now in the last 10 minutes and just sort of get the reaction from our viewers to what you've been saying, Natalie.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all. We've got so many questions, Nat, so I'll try and go through them as quickly as possible. John Cooper says it needs explaining to the public how the Israel intelligence services has a stranglehold on politics globally. How do we do that? How do we explain to the public?
I think that, I mean, there's plenty of evidence there. So I think it's a case of just keep educating yourself and then sharing that information with other people, but just making sure that we get it from the right source. We understand what we're saying, so we don't end up straying into areas that could, have us actually legitimately targeted for anti-Semitism. But I think it's important to educate ourselves and share that, beyond what we're doing. I think it's just about finding the courage to stand up. And I keep saying this to people: do not be scared of labels. Those labels will fall away in time. We need to find the courage, as Palestinians have demonstrated for over 7 decades now, and just stand up. I think I said this in my podcast, if anybody ever saw it, with the Point of Discussion with Eddie West, a local friend of mine, about, just to ignore the label. So what? You think I'm an anti-Semite? Our stances are rooted in international law. We need to be confident in that. We need to find our courage and just ignore the rest of it, because the idea is to silence us. So what we should do is double down.
Thank you. Ed Mahoney says, why do we focus on Palestine / Israel when we should just focus on home affairs? We alienate some voters by mentioning such a divisive topic, don't we? What has it got to do with us?
Well, hopefully a gentleman will have listened to some of the earlier interview where I kind of talk about that. I think that it's not a one thing or another. And I think it's important, most of us, and that includes myself personally, I'm not just focused on Palestine. That's my international area of focus. But actually, I'm trying to do what I can within the community, trying to fight for, the rights of ordinary people within the UK, within the British Isles as a whole. So I don't think it's one thing or the other. It doesn't mean, if some people are put off, then there's not a huge amount I can do about that, other than, I always say this to individuals. In fact, one of the jobs I had to do when I was away was to give tours to delegations of various groups, including politicians. And I had a group that had Tories and Liberal Dems and Labour members. And one of the things I highlighted was to Caroline Feldman, who actually wrote a blog about her trip to Hebron. And I said to her, and this is what this gentleman perhaps needs to really think about, is there's a danger to us all when we make international law irrelevant. And I think you see this with the policing bill with spy cops. If we make it acceptable for international law and human rights to be undermined, and for freedoms to be taken away, we know that the chickens will always come home to roost. So I think that when people say, we are a global community, whether we like it or not, globalization, our global economy has ensured that. So what happens on the other side of the world does actually impact us locally. So that is one of the reasons why, first of all, it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. You can do both. But secondly, it does impact us. If Israel is allowed to undermine our democracy, which it's doing, and doing all the other things, but also if we accept these things being done to other people, what's to say that as political landscapes change, it won't then become an issue for us? And would we not hope that people on the other side of the world, if we were being silenced and being oppressed, would also make a stand for us?
Thank you. That was exactly the answer I wanted from you.
Yes, absolutely.
Does the Marty O says, does the US and the UK by extension use Israel to subjugate the Middle East? Or is it the other way around?
I would say that obviously it's in the US interest to have a European colonial, settler colonialist state within the region, because obviously it's about controlling resources. I would say that the US gains a lot from it, as does the West as a whole. I think that America will only be influenced by a state as much as it wishes to, and I think that's important to know. I don't think that Israel has, is stronger than America. I just think that it's or has more influence than America. I just think that it serves a purpose to Americans, and we should never forget the number of Christian Zionists that exist. who have their own religious ideological reasons for Israel existing and continuing as it does.
Thank you. Well, somebody called Shan, no idea who that is, asks, Robert Inlakash described protests in Israel that are happening now. Can that explain what exactly is happening right now?
I'm not really sure I kind of understand the question, if I'm honest. I mean, in terms of what's happening, if we're talking about what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah with everything that's going on there in Jerusalem, I would say obviously you've got the Kahanis who gain power. Lahava, which is a far-right group, have entered the Knesset. They've got 6 seats, which is terrifying. They are the Jewish equivalent of the KKK. They're a white supremacist and fascist group, I would say. In terms of those protests, well, they've been seen for years. Now it's in Jerusalem and it's getting some mainstream coverage. But actually these protests by these individuals, I mean, the Jewish groups who are shouting death to Arabs, that's been going on for years. That's nothing new. This idea that it's a small group, that's total nonsense. And you can see that if you look into the area, again, if you want to visit. In terms of the Palestinian protests, well, they've never given up their resistance. It might have taken different forms, but their resistance has never ended.
Thank you. Aziz asks, we had Nelson Mandela in South Africa to focus on in the global fight against our apartheid there. Do we need a person like that in Palestine? And if so, do we have someone?
There's lots of people that exist like that, whether it's Omar Barghouti, whether it's my good friend Issa Amro. You know, there's so many individuals. I think that what's slightly different is, one, I would say this has been going on for much longer now. Secondly, there isn't the same. So whereas with South Africa, obviously a lot of people opposed it and a lot of the West supported it, you know, for all sorts of reasons. I think that the lobby group wasn't as effective in controlling the narrative. So I would argue that there are lots of, you know, the equivalents of Nelson Mandela, but they're denied the same platform that perhaps Nelson Mandela got. And also we need to, I think sometimes people look back, and I was very young during apartheid, so I'm not going to pretend I did a huge amount in it, because I didn't, because however, what I would say is that people have this idea because of the movies being made now, and Nelson Mandela is this great hero, but he wasn't always seen as a hero. And I think it's important that people remember that, you know, we remember and talk about him now and his great speeches. But that wasn't always the case. It was when the tide turned, really, we began to see him giving a greater platform and able to speak on behalf. And I think that as the narrative turns, and we will end this apartheid, this will come to an end. We will win this war, I'm sure of that. But when the real tide turns properly, we will see those individuals, I think, having a greater platform.
We've got time for one more.
Right. Can we talk about Abbas? This is an immediate problem and can be easier fixed.
Abbas, you mean the Prime President? Is it President? You mean the so-called Palestinian leader? I'm a bit confused by that.
I don't know. It's a question from Manny. And I thought I'd ask it because I didn't know who Abbas was either. So
I'm thinking
I apologise to Manny.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, if it's Abbas, yeah, he's an issue. But I think that he's an instrument of Israel as well. The Palestinian Authority, the leadership are totally corrupt. I think many Palestinians will say that. But Israel won't allow a effective Palestinian government to function. It just won't allow it because of the security arrangements and everything else.
Listen, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was a really inspiring discussion. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time and sharing with us your experience, your first-hand experience. You've obviously got a depth of knowledge, and to hear you speak there so calmly and clearly about the injustice, the outrage, I think it's very, very persuasive, and hopefully a lot of people will have tuned in and will certainly share this afterwards as well. And I think it's really important that we support Natalie, that we support each other, we get behind the Palestinian cause. It's important because we're internationalists at the end of the day, and if we can't stand in solidarity with people who are being oppressed, and very often being oppressed by the same sort of corporations, institutions, and politicians that are oppressing people in this country. And as Pastor Niemöller once said, first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak out for me.
Exactly.
And all we've got, as I keep saying, is each other, is solidarity. That's where our strength comes from. It doesn't come from lots of money, because we ain't got it. But we've got each other. If we stick together, we will prevail. And it's so inspiring to hear Natalie talk in those terms and talk about, the hopeful vision for the Palestinian cause to prevail there, because it's so long and the oppression is so disgusting, and so many people have lost their lives, so many people have been incarcerated and living, having their homes taken from them, their children being imprisoned. It's horrendous, it's appalling, and we need to do everything we can. Everybody watching today, the Resist Movement for People's Party, I think, to promote this cause, because their cause is our cause, and we stand as one, or we fall. If they fall, we fall. Their injury is our injury, and we have to remember that. And that old watchword about unity being strength is so crucial. So thank you again, Natalie, for this evening.
It's a huge privilege.
Really appreciate that. No, it's great. Well, the privilege is all ours, I can assure you. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you found that useful. I certainly did. Tune in next week at the same time on Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.